Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thanks for joining us today. Our next guest is Dr. Jasmine Mena from Bucknell University. Thanks for coming in today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Before we get to the reason I asked you to come on, can you tell your listeners a little bit about who you are? What do you teach at Bucknell? What is your training and background in psychology? Anything you help with the listeners understand some context about you.
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I focus on multicultural issues, critical psychology, and I teach at Bucknell University. Bucknell University is in Lewisburg in central Pennsylvania. And here I primarily teach undergraduate students. We teach using the teacher-scholar model. And the types of courses that I teach include introductory psychology, multicultural psychology, Latinx psychology. I also teach a number of foundation courses, one on success and failure, and one that I'm developing this summer actually called Unintended Health Disparities, that just kind of looks at the policy level considerations. So that's mostly how I spend my time.
That's a very exciting array, and I might ask later if we have a few minutes. I'd especially like to talk to the success and failure course and the unintentional diversities, but lots of good things there, but I'm going to stay focused. The reason that I asked you to be a guest is that you were one of the keynote speakers at the Teachers College Decolonizing Psychology conference back in the spring, talking about curriculum. And towards the end of your talk, you brought up something I hadn't heard of, which was called labor-based grading. And I thought, well, I could try to figure this out and read, or I could ask you to come in and tell the listeners a little bit about it. And you thankfully were generous enough to be willing to come tell us about it. So what's labor-based grading? We'll just start there, and then I can ask some follow-up questions as we go.
Sure. Labor-based grading contracts is actually relatively new to me. I have historically been grading like the rest of us, whatever we learned. But a few years ago, a professor called Dr. ASK070 came to Bucknell University to talk about his recent book that is exactly focused on labor-based grading. And it took me a while to actually embrace it because I had some concerns. I wasn't very familiar with it, but as I learned more about it, I kind of stuck my toe in, and I started to experiment with part of my course, part of my grade being labor-based and the other part traditional. And little by little, as I learned more about it, I just decided I needed to go 100%. So for the past couple of years, this is how I've been grading all of my courses. So the key about labor-based grading is that it focuses on the labor and effort that the students put into the course over, and I know this could sound scary initially, but over ideas of mastery, over ideas of a standard, as if there is a standard. And what I love about it is that, and he's really passionate about this, is that he points out how focusing on effort problematizes standards that are based on white middle-class values. An educational system that has been and was established based around the needs of predominantly white students. Yet we expect all students to meet the same standards, to use the same language, as if there's only one way to speak. And so he teaches in writing, primarily English and writing classes. So my colleagues and I, especially Dr. Stevenson and I, have done a lot of talking about, well, how do we transfer this approach for psychology and neuroscience? She's a neuroscientist in the psychology program where I teach also. And so we started to work with it and essentially work with the assumptions that underlie the approach to labor-based grading, right? So the idea of problematizing the white middle class standards, but also empowering students to have agency over their learning by acknowledging that the one thing that they have the most control over is their time and the labor that they dedicate to their courses. And so we disentangle the effort they put in from the quality of their work. And their grade is based on the effort, not only the quality. Now, you can imagine what will we have them do? Because we do care about quality. We do care about knowing that our students are learning and growing and working very hard, right? So that's where we've spent a lot of time, is thinking about what kinds of assignments could make sure that they learn, that they can't get around it. And so they get graded all or nothing. Did they complete the assignment fully? Then they get credit for that. If they did it partially or not at all, they do not get credit for that. So that's the basics of it. Is that making sense? What areas seem?
Yeah, so maybe I can ask just like a specific example. I teach research methods. So one of the things they do is write a paper. So when we talk about writing, a paper based on some data that we collect in class, and they read some background information, with the labor-based approach, really kind of focus maybe less on how much it sounds like scientific voice or the correctness of the citations. Yeah, like if you used a paper, maybe walk us through what that looks like.
Like you, I also ask students to write research papers or papers based on research that they conducted. So literature reviews as well as research-based papers in psychology. So I have had to find ways to prize students' effort in the work without getting bogged down by the quality, or did they meet the specifics of what I expect. And so this is not foreign to you at all, but the idea of scaffolded assignments helps a great deal with this. So did they complete their, say, annotated bibliographies? Now, the key to labor-based grading, in my view, is providing very clear assignment guidelines. So I provide them with the guidelines of how many sources, how many words, what should, in my view, what should this annotation accomplish, and give them guiding questions. So then the question for me, for grading purposes, is did they meet those basic expectations? Now, when I find that they are perhaps maybe didn't read closely enough, I see some problems in thinking or logic or things like that, I let them know that. They still get that feedback, and so they can improve upon it moving forward. But they don't come to me shaking, afraid of failing, or simply trying to figure out the formula for whatever assignment I'm asking them to do to feed that back to me. So the idea is, hey, you're in charge of your learning. How are you going to do it? Here, let me give you a roadmap, and I will give you, your acknowledgement, right? Acknowledgement of completion of your work as you move along. But to reach your personal best, you will have to figure out what that is. So what I like about this is that everyone has access to the full grade scale. So for example, if you have students, as most of us do, who come from backgrounds where they've received a lot of enrichment and a lot of opportunities, they often may find that they don't have to challenge themselves as much in any given, time for any given assignment. Well, guess what? I want them to challenge themselves more, because we can all grow. So everyone, no matter what level they're starting at, will push themselves to their next personal best with this approach. So I really value that. And so every assignment will have its guidelines and very clear, specific guidelines so that students feel in control and can dedicate the amount of time and effort to reach their personal best. So it does require a bit of reframing of what is the purpose of this class. Is it to get that A, or is it to see how far you can push yourself to grow?
I like that. And I think a helpful piece there, because another class I teach is statistics, or even in research methods, there are a few things that are standards in the field, right? If the P is less than 0.05, we say it's significant. It's not, we say that it's not. So, right, running the analysis is one thing, and that would be something you want to report their success on, but then also that interpretation piece. But it sounds like here that it's not just having done it, but part of that effort is also in the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Right. And obviously they do have to know certain things. At the end of the day, it's not anything goes. It's not, well, if you think the p-value is, this, no. So we still have to let them know what this, what it means. There are different ways of doing that without, for example, just a multiple choice exam. We can, interestingly, with some, and this is not part of Inua's approach, but we find that it is possible to assign exams, or we prefer quizzes, just more frequent quizzes. But if they can explain conceptually why we use 0.05, I find that that's deeper form of learning than being able to select it from a multiple choice exam. So at time, what we have done actually in some of our courses is we would give a quiz, and they would have to explain why, after they completed the quiz, they would have to explain why that answer was correct and why the answer that they got wrong, why it was wrong, and which one is the correct answer. So they revisit the work, not for the points on the quiz, but for demonstrating their understanding conceptually as to why. And so that's an example of how we could use quizzes.
And if faculty want to do this, I assume you don't just want to scaffold how the assignments work, but also why this is different. So this does sound a little bit like, for our frequent listeners, we talked about specifications grading a few times. Mm-hmm. The same idea that you would achieve credit for the assignment or not. And that's something I didn't do a great job, was giving enough background to students. And maybe you can answer this and then we can transition into failure. Several of them said, I've never gotten a 0 on something. And I was like, well, it's not a 0. It's just not there yet. So how do you talk to students about this approach?
One option is I tell them about resubmission opportunities. So if I understand your question correctly, so if students aren't there yet, I try to have opportunities for them to have a second or third or multiple opportunities to demonstrate that competency. So in some cases, it's a similar assignment that is repeated over the course of the semester. So it might be a different, kind of like a different reading note on a different piece of material, but they can demonstrate how they're reading more closely, or the connections that they're making with other concepts in the class. Early in the semester, I encourage students to resubmit a completed assignment that they did not get credit for. I don't do that for every single assignment because I don't want it to become a habitual, well, I don't have time, so I'll just do this really quickly now and then I'll come back to this later. So I don't want to encourage that type of behavior. But I certainly think that giving them an opportunity to get a good handle on what's what's considered complete. So I think that's helpful to them. So I give them 1 or 2 opportunities and every student gets that opportunity. I think revision and resubmission is really helpful, and paired up especially with reflection. So what I really want them to gain is tools that they're going to be able to apply in the future. I don't really know what paths they're taking. They don't really know what paths they're taking for the most part. So if I can feel more confident that they can read closely, analyze text, communicate so that they have these skills and tools, I will feel more confident that they can assimilate new knowledge as our field, expands. So I put of course they need to know the foundations, but I do find that focusing on those tools helps a great deal. So related to that is how frequently do they reflect on their learning? How frequently do they actually sit and think about what are the behaviors or what are the environmental issues that are conducive to my doing my best work? So they actually complete regular reflections as part of this process, not just on the material, but on themselves and how they're approaching this course. How did the last 2 weeks go? What helped you to learn the material best? What perhaps got in the way? What are your new learning goals for learning this material in this course? And so they make interesting discoveries, such as, oh, well, when I study with all my friends around, it's a more challenging task. Oh, yeah. Things like that. And then they make new goals for how they think they're going to work best moving forward. And I think that's just as valuable as the content in the course. Because with the new awareness that I've observed that they gain, they approach the course with more focus and interest and vigor, I think.
I love that, because we're going to have to live with ourselves long past your courses, right? Yeah. And our not helpful habits here could be not helpful habits in a lot of contexts. I'm going to ask a kind of off-the-cuff question, as I want to do here. One of the things I've been doing this summer is an online course that has us do like a somatic reflection at the beginning, which is not something that's ever been part of my cognitive psychology training. We sort of start and stop at the head. So the idea of like checking in on my body, it's not something I've done. Is that something that students are bringing up, some of those external factors? Are they sleeping well? How's their nutrition, exercise? Are they starting to recognize kind of that their whole selves matter, not just kind of their thoughts about psychology? Is that something you've seen?
Yes, I have seen that. They have discussed that. Things like when the semester gets really stressful, or when things happen in their lives and they see how it is affecting their ability to concentrate and learn. In some cases, because this is an assignment that is separate from the content of the course, they're invited to think about what they might be able to do. So they bring up things that they will do to try and do the best they can given the circumstances that they're confronting. So one of the questions that I always ask them is, in this particular type of reflection, is how the content of the course is impacting them affectively as well. So how they're incorporating this new knowledge critically, yes, incorporating into their prior knowledge, but also how it's affecting them affectively. Because I really do find, and from my understanding of learning, that it is affective and cognitive as well, right? Non-cognitive and cognitive factors do matter. So I try to bring attention to that so that they can also learn to self-modulate and kind of see what's happening. Not to mention that I do teach some difficult social, interpersonal, and emotional topics in some of the courses. And I want to make sure that they feel like they have the space to tune into that and to bring those issues to me and to the class as needed. So I find that really a valuable component. And honestly, I think students really appreciate being seen as a whole person. And I think this type of assignment or this type of talk allows them to incorporate all of this learning into their whole being. Not to mention, at the core of labor-based grading contracts, as introduced by Inoue, is our ideas of mindfulness and compassion. The idea that we are going to give each other feedback, because there is peer feedback and I give feedback. And some of that could be difficult to hear, may be uncomfortable sometimes. And can we make a commitment to receive and give feedback with compassion, assuming the best intent of the classroom community that we're trying to create, even when we acknowledge that there could be impact, sometimes negative impact. So that sounds something that's very much central to the labor-based grading approach as outlined by NOA. And mindfulness for the same reasons that we were discussing, because we do need to learn and continually attend to our learning, to the process of our learning. So developing these metacognitive skills associated with learning, the content and the way we learn, so the process as well as the actual material, becomes an important part of the labor-based grading approach, because it's up to them, right? You're giving them agency and saying, hey, yeah, I could try to cajole you to do this and the other thing, but at the end of the day, you'll do it or you won't, and I'm not going to judge you negatively for it. It's your choice, but here are your options. So that's the attitude that the instructor takes. It's not a situation of adversarial. And I mean, we can't remove the hierarchy, right? Like, how many years of education do I have? Like, yeah, I have a few more years than my students. So, but at the same time, I want to sit or stand side by side with them as they learn, as opposed to in some hierarchical authoritative position and saying, hey, wagging a finger, like, did you not do this? You should do this. Well, guess what? I understand your life is complicated. It's okay with me if you get a C. Is it okay with you? These are the ways. These are the ways you do that.
Thank you. That is great. And I think that compassion is a word that pops up on here. Unsurprisingly, people who want to come talk about teaching, they do, that's often where things end up. And that's important to me too. Mm. But again, it's an important reminder about being explicit about that. So that's something I definitely want to add next semester is, some just framework about it, right? Please try to accept my feedback coming from a place of compassion and growth, knowing that when I get that from reviewers on a manuscript, I don't always make that assumption myself. So it might be good to practice what I ask as well. We're coming close to kind of our normal stop time for an episode, but I want to give you a chance. If there's anything you'd like to tell the listeners, maybe your hottest takes from your success and failure course or something from your upcoming class, like if you could get psychology professors in general a piece of knowledge or encouragement, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I guess I could share what's been on my mind a lot lately, and which inspired me to offer this foundation seminar. This is for incoming students, and it's a writing intensive course for incoming students. And I selected the topic of unintended health disparities. And granted, I should clarify that the is parenthetically unintended, because it's not always clear if the health disparities that we see, mental and physical health, are completely unintended, or if they are the result of careless policy, right? Careless, but things that we already should know, that we know enough about. And so what my call is for myself and for my colleagues is for us to together to make a more concerted effort to think about translation of our psychological knowledge to policy, because I think that we do have a lot to offer. And I think that our well-being as, communities, as people, as families, it's not just at the intrapersonal level. It's not just at the interpersonal level. It's not even just at the community level, but our societal level as well. And you know what? Let me scale it back and go back to like the neuroscience perspective as well. It's at that level too. And so what I want to see, what I'm challenging myself to think more about in my research and in my work, is to think more than one level at a time. And so I think that will be really helpful if we can challenge ourselves to think that way. And it is challenging for me, but exciting too.
I will share that excitement and also the part of my brain that says, ooh, that's something I will have to learn about. But I like to take on a challenge.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I wish you a good summer. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.